Every act of governance carries moral weight. How? Let's find out. Ethical governance does not begin with grand statements or heroic reforms. It starts much earlier, in those unseen frameworks we build, in the norms civil servants internalize. In fact, it begins in those very small, routine, everyday actions. Every single administrative action a civil servant takes is an act of building trust. In this sense, administrative ethics is a silent foundation of governance. Without administrative ethics, governance becomes mechanical, it becomes too technical. In fact, it can become predatory also, thereby undermining the very legitimacy of governance. As Dwight Waldo rightly observed, public administration is not value free, it's the application of values through action. I'm sure by now you must have guessed today's session is about administrative ethics. And today we'll discuss the meaning of administrative ethics. Why do civil servants need administrative ethics? We'll try to understand the levels of administrative ethics, the macro, the meso, and the micro. So stay tuned, and towards the end, I'll give you a question also to practice. Administrative ethics is a moral compass of governance. It is not confined to practicing honesty or practicing virtues like integrity. It's more than that. At its very heart, administrative ethics refers to practice of ethical principles in daily work by public officials and institutions. Administrative ethics, in principle, governs how power is exercised, how decisions are made, how trust is won or lost. That is the crux of administrative ethics. Speaking of administrative ethics, Terry Cooper reminds us that ethical public administration requires seeing governance not only as a technical task but as a moral endeavour. Interesting thought. Speaking of moral endeavour, Bowman and West took the idea forward by outlining three interconnected levels at which administrative ethics has to operate. At the topmost or the highest level is the macro. At this level, administrative actions align with constitutional values such as justice, equality, and rule of law. Remember, at this level, it's constitutional values. Right below that, at the middle level, comes the meso. At this level, ethical expectations are embedded into the culture and processes of organizations, thereby making ethics a normal part of how institutions function. This is department level ethics. Now comes the lowest level or the micro level. This is where individuals come in. This is where individual public servants are expected to practice values such as integrity, fairness, accountability in their daily conduct. According to Bowman and West, this way administrative ethics becomes personal responsibility and institutional duty, both. Similar view was echoed by Catherine Denhart when she wrote that administrative ethics lies at the intersection of personal integrity, organizational culture, and the larger public interest. Presence of strong structure at macro and meso level makes it easy for a civil servant to act ethically and harder to be unethical. Without supportive structures, even the most well-meaning civil servant can falter. That's why supportive structure is needed. Further up, for sustainable ethical governance, all the three levels have to operate together. They have to be interdependent, right from micro to macro. Everything has to work in tandem. Only then sustainable ethical governance is possible. While adherence to law is a basic expectation of a public servant, but ethical governance demands more. Scholars note that law only sets minimum threshold for conduct, while ethics, on the other side, aspires for higher ideals, even if law is silent or ambiguous or permissive. In fact, in administrative ethics, an action may be legally permissible but can be ethically troubling if it erodes public trust, if it favors powerful over vulnerable. Immanuel Kant also said something similar in his book Groundwork for Metaphysics of Morals, where he argued that moral worth lies not merely in following rules but in acting out of a conscious duty to moral principles. Similarly, ethical governance is not being content with technical legality. It requires deeper commitment on the part of civil servants to public good and fairness. Legal correctness is good, but ethical correctness is essential. Let's illustrate this with a real life example. A regulatory authority approves an industrial project because it has met with all the environmental laws. Legally correct, but this decision to approve the project did not consider or factor in the community opposition, the environmental damage, the harm it's doing to the marginalized people. Legally correct, but ethically speaking, this approval violated all the basic values of sustainability, justice, human dignity. So, in such cases, a public administrator should ask this question: is this action allowed? At the same time, they should ask this question also: is this right? Now, let's understand why administrative ethics matters in civil services. Now, usually people see governance as a technical exercise. People see it as an activity involving rules, regulations, and procedures. People forget that beneath every administrative act, there is a moral choice. It can be a simple act as passing a file, approving somebody's welfare benefit, or ensuring that somebody gets the PDS grains. These simple acts have major ethical consequences. So that is why every administrative act has a moral consequence. As Dwight Waldo noted, that public administration is inherently value-laden. Every administrative decision is also a moral decision. What Waldo is trying to tell us here is that in civil services, ethics is not optional. It's a very cornerstone of legitimacy and effectiveness. With every single act, a civil servant is not managing procedures. They're ensuring that lives are changed. They're ensuring that services are delivered. In fact, they're creating experiences. In fact, every act of a civil servant ensures that citizens experience justice. They experience fairness. That is the reason why Waldo is trying to tell us that ethics is not optional. Ethics is not something idealistic in administration. It is something which is everyday. It is something which is experienced by citizens every single day. Civil servants are entrusted with more than administrative authority. They are stewards of public trust. Their role goes beyond enforcing rules and regulations. In fact, they allocate resources. They take decisions that impact lives of people on an everyday basis. Civil servants, along with being implementers and interpreters of policies at the ground level, also act as custodians of constitutional values. And this is something which most of us miss. The same sentiment was echoed by John Rohr in his book Ethics for Bureaucrats, where he writes, "The ethics of public administrators are rooted in the regime values of the Constitution." Civil services and power goes hand in hand. And the problem with power is it carries a quite small risk. Without proper ethical reflection, even the best of the administrators run the risk of misusing power, run the risk of being tempted by power. And when power tempts you, it does not lead to very dramatic acts of corruption. It can be a subtle form of ethical erosion in form of favoritism. This can be in form of favoritism, where a civil servant prioritizes the powerful or the connected over the deserving. Or it can be in form of injustice, where rules are applied unevenly based on personal biases. Or it can be corruption in form of misusing office for personal gain. As Lord Acton famously warned, that power tends to corrupt. But in public administration, the deeper truth is power needs ethical discipline. And it is here that administrative ethics comes into play. Without the safeguard of ethics, it's very difficult to align bureaucratic power with public interest. So it is administrative ethics that ensures that there's an alignment between civil services and public interest. In short, it is administrative ethics that transforms civil services from being mechanical and technical to something humane and meaningful. And before we close, just to reflect on today's topic, I'll leave you with a question to think about. And the practice question is: define administrative ethics. Explain why administrative ethics is essential in public administration. It's a two-part question. First is definition. Second is you have to explain why administrative ethics is essential. Please leave your answers in the comments section, and I'll also leave an answer outline in the community tab tomorrow. Before you leave, a quick update. Next week, I'm going to talk about ethics infrastructure. Today we learned administrative ethics, but this ethics has to be sustained, and to sustain it, we require a robust structure. That's the theme of next week's episode. So long, happy learning.